Well, Kurt, if you'd like to come up and join me, we'll work around the dishes of our previous panel. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you all know our United States representative from here on the Central Coast and Inland, Kurt Schrader, who's been with us since 2009, working in the United States Congress. Congressman Schrader currently serves as a member of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, which oversees a wide portfolio of issues ranging from healthcare to the environment. Prior to joining that committee, he served on the House Committee on Agriculture, where his efforts on the Farm Bill Conference Committee contributed to successfully passing findings,
and they're in the United States Congress. You don't get that because that's not the focus of, frankly, a lot of the attention. Right now, I think there's only one person in the United States of America at the federal level that matters. That's the president. And I think you take you can take either solace or fear in the fact that it's really Congress that our forefathers set up to be in charge. And we don't show ourselves to good advantage. A lot of times we campaign against ourselves, so why the hell would you vote for us, frankly, at the end of the day? But I guess my message would be that the rank and file, there's a serious effort to actually legislate and work for the people of this great country. And that gets lost a little bit. We have huge differences. I'm always reminded about what a huge country this really is. And when I was in the state legislature, a lot of my friends who were up here a moment ago, they think, wow, it's such a diverse state. You got Eastern Oregon, Central Oregon, Southern Oregon, the Valley, Portland, being unto itself. And I'm thinking, wow, that's really diverse. Man, you go to Washington, D.C., I just gave a little press event with Schrader and the Coastal Caucus here, talk about offshore oil drilling, anathema, I think, to most every Oregonian. I don't care, Republican, Democrat, from Eastern Oregon or over here on the coast. And yet back east, it's a vital part of their economy. And you kind of have to recognize that. If we want to get to some common ground, some legislation that's going to work for Oregon, I've got to respect the fact that there are people in this country that have a slightly different point of view. And that's gotten lost, the whole civility, around this discussion has gotten lost. I know you and some others complain about how things are going in the state legislature. You guys look like Pollyanna compared to the stuff that we're seeing in Washington, D.C. It's unfortunate. And you're going to see a whole new movement, mark my words, up to this election, after this election, on both sides of the aisle to reclaim leadership in the United States Congress on behalf of the American people, not in one political agenda after another.
Well, thank you for that. And I apologize for leading off with a question like that, but I think it's on the minds of a lot of Oregonians and a lot of Americans. Now, you touched on the drilling issue, and you and I just finished up a press conference earlier today that was hosted by the Schrader Foundation. But I find it very interesting that earlier this year, the Trump administration announced a significant change. The change including the possibility of oil and gas drilling off our Oregon coast. And they did conduct hearings to review this. The hearing in Salem was something remarkable to me because nobody was allowed to speak. They organized a hotel room and they invited people to come in and present written comments only. And at the same time, hundreds of Oregonians came to the Capitol steps and spoke out on this issue. I was one of the people that stood up and talked about drilling off our Oregon coast. Tell us your perspective on this drilling question. You touched on it, but give us a little more detail. What's the likelihood and what's the potential impact on us here should this move forward?
Well, I'd like to think the likelihood is near zero. There are many other parts of this great country where they will be welcomed with more open arms, let's put it that way. Hadn't been any oil drilling off our coast since, 1964. This is not prime territory for oil or natural gas. Although the new technology, one never knows. And frankly, the oil and gas industry, whether you like it or not, is very alive and well in the back east and the upper Midwest and down in the South. So I would like to think that we are far off of the agenda, far off of the radar of a lot of these companies. So hopefully for Oregonians, Washingtonians, and Californians, this is not likely to happen. But I'll tell you this, and you guys have seen this in this last election, no matter who you are. Democracy is a participatory sport. You just don't elect a Suzanne Bonamici or Kurt Schrader or David Gomberg or something, or Barbara Smith Warner. You have to show up at these things. We're only as good as your collective backing to raise this issue and continue to raise that issue to make sure that they go to greener pastures when it comes to oil and gas drilling, that sort of thing. It would be devastating, I think, to our fishery industry. I don't know of any group, business, environmental, that's in favor of having oil and gas drilling off our coast. I spent a lot of time, this is my district, this is David's. We spend a lot of time working together on fishery issues, trying to rebuild a robust, sustainable fishery industry here that could be a huge economic boon to the Central Oregon coast and frankly to our state. And that would be potentially devastating. One mistake, one spill, and you know it's going to happen. It would be devastating out here. So the delegation is pretty united on this. We stand in good stead with our colleagues to the north and south of us along the west coast. So I think it's very, very unlikely, and we would fight that tooth and nail.
And I'm just, forgive the pun, I'm going to drill just a little bit deeper here. Because in the press conference that we held a few minutes ago, you spoke to the fact that our marine industries here up and down the coast are a $2.5 billion enterprise. 33,000 jobs, 25,000 of which are involved in tourism. And so the concern that we bring forward is that the potential for drilling here, the Center for Biodiversity suggests they would expect it would result in 21 spills. And it's going to have an effect on our economy, it's going to have an effect on our health. It'll have an effect quite simply on our daily view shed. When we look offshore and we like our sunsets the way they are and we like our beaches the way they are. So
on the coast you can still see the sun apparently, so that's good to hear. Not so much in the valley.
So what you say we should be involved, and we should, but what advice do you have people on how to exercise that involvement?
Well, I think the news conference that you and the others called together here today draws a light on this, keeps that in front of your congressional delegation, keeps it in front of the state delegation, keeps it in front of the Oregonians writ large. We can take that message back to Washington, D.C. We've offered, this is the extent and breadth of the new drilling is very new and scary. But since the majority had changed in 2010, we've had these types of efforts since that time period. Well, I've helped with the rest of the folks in the delegation, again, California and Washington included, doing Western Coastal Protection Ocean Act to make sure that this doesn't occur. The states get to exercise the right of how they want their coastal development to occur. So I think you're going to see a lot of that continue. I just find it hard, David, to believe that these folks in Washington, D.C. would try and let's put it this way, they tried that with, remember we had the helicopter issue here on the coast, where going to put a lot of fishermen and women at risk by pulling out the helicopters. They had no concept back east about how cold these waters are in the middle of summer, colder than winter, and no clue about the need for that helicopter. Well, we gave them religion. The community stood that up. That was the admiral who came out and listened to the testimony from the folks along the Central Oregon coast here. He was blown away and impressed, and that added a lot of validity to the work that Peter DeFazio in that case and myself were doing to make sure that stayed here. So this is what I mean about that grassroots support, supporting our efforts, because we're, again, only as good as you guys help us out to be.
And I remember that night that Admiral Gomberg came down from Seattle, and you facilitated and organized that gathering, and the communities of the Central Coast stood up and gave a loud, clear, straightforward message that the air station here in Lincoln County would save lives. And that message was received, so thanks for mentioning that example. You touched on our fishing fleet, an iconic part of our coastal heritage and a major economic driver, particularly here on the Central Coast. Here in Lincoln County, I think that the fishing industry is the second largest generator of income dollars to Lincoln County. As an interesting aside, the greatest source of revenue for Lincoln County are transfer payments, retirement payments, pensions, Social Security, and the like. So we have a very active and vibrant retirement industry here, even though it's not regarded as an industry per se. But getting back to the fishing fleet, I just wanted to ask you, what are you doing in Congress to support our fishing industry and our fishing people?
Sure. Well, it's a big issue, and it's, again, an issue where, thank goodness, there's usually bipartisan support, trying to rally around opportunities. The Central Oregon coast has been good in terms of getting grants from the federal government. to rebuild some of the ports, whether it's Newport, Toledo. We've worked hard to make sure the jetties that are a lifeline to a lot of the smaller Oregon communities along the coast get refurbished at least in due time. And again, the coastal community's been really good at creating great documents, send those back east with our support that help us make the case for you at the end of the day. And we're competing against some big boys and girls here down in New Orleans, up in Boston, and those areas. And frankly, you guys carry yourself very well and punch, I think, way above your weight. We also work very closely, as you, in my humble opinion, I think the coast has been generous in supporting sustainable fishery industry. The whole catch share thing, very novel. It's become commonplace now, kind of accepted wisdom to a certain extent on our coast. Tell you, back east, those fishermen didn't want to play ball at all. They didn't want to play ball at all. And I got concerned when the federal government started getting a little heavy-handed with how that program was going to be done and drawn out, and work closely with the fishing fleet out here, able to get them to moderate their enthusiasms, make sure that marine reserves and some of the bycatch issues were resolved in a way the fishermen could still eke out a living and look to a better, more sustainable industry. And hopefully this coming season, things have been better. We almost came up against another issue at the beginning of the year where the Coast Guard didn't get its act together on giving out the regulatory framework by which the fishermen were supposed to operate, whether it was with the nets or the leader line industry for the recreational folks. But again, we were able to work with them, and thankfully, it's a good example of where, despite the government gets a bad rap, occasionally they work with you, occasionally they listen, and we're actually able to make sure that these regulatory frameworks got in place so that the fishermen and women could do what they do best. And if you look at the development down in Newport along the docks there, all this redevelopment, the fishing industry, whether it's shellfish or whiting or you name it, is alive and well and coming back in a very sustainable way that hopefully will be great for our community. And this is stuff that if we ever get past all this trade stuff, we can start selling overseas too.
Excellent, excellent. Well, another thing you touched on briefly is Oregon's wildfire season. And I don't think there's an Oregonian in-state this week that isn't aware of the dire situation we're facing and one of the most devastating and active fire seasons that we've seen in a long time, which is the same thing we said a year ago, and today's worse. And it's not just an interior issue. We certainly had major issues at Chetco Bar last year. We had fires break out near Depot Bay in my own district, as well as over in Willamina. What's going on in Congress that can help us with the wildfire threat here at home?
I love these softball questions, don't you guys? This is good. I want David to moderate all my things, please. Well, as an aside, I will say what's been interesting about this particular Congress is that it's been a pretty successful Congress, in my humble opinion, for a lot of the meat and potato issues for the state of Oregon. And this is one of them. The fishing stuff I just talked about, that's another one. It's not all, being in Congress or being a lawmaker even at the state level, it's not all about curing cancer or, making the world safe for world peace. A lot of it's just hopefully representing your district. Hopefully making sure that this big, crazy country of ours listens to you. And a lot of times that doesn't seem to be happening. People wonder, does anyone out there really care about me? And this wildfire issue is exactly one of those issues. I remember serving early on in the United States Congress and seeing all the money get spent on Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, the flooding issues, some of the high wind issues. And I'm thinking, we have these wildfires every fire season, every year, every summer. And the summers get longer and longer, the fires get stronger and stronger. Wondering where the hell is the respect for the disasters that we face out here. And nice bipartisan piece of legislation, Senator Wyden and Senator Crapo on the Senate side, myself and Mike Simpson from Idaho on the House side, put this bill together. This is back under the Obama administration to, let's go ahead and at least treat wildfires the same we do every other disaster. It doesn't eat into the budget of the Forest Service. It comes out of the disaster relief fund. And Paul Ryan wouldn't let that happen, and I'm not sad to see him moving on, to be very honest with you. But it had great bipartisan support, and we were able to finally get that in a budget bill earlier this year. And hopefully in a year or two, it's going to take a while to work its way through Congress and the money to be appropriated. Hopefully in a year or two, you're going to see an opportunity by the Federal Forest Service to have that half of their budget that always went to fight fires, now is going to go to protect our forests. They can get in there, do some forest management, clean things up, reduce the hazardous fuel load, maybe do some prescribed burns if that's what's called for under controlled circumstances, so that these fires don't get completely out of control. And I hope that that's going to be a big part of improving our climate change initiative here in Oregon, and hopefully nationwide. The whole West is ablaze, as you talked about right now, David, and it's hard to get the resources there. The trick is to help prevent these fires, or at least mitigate the severity of these fires. And it's been a nice bipartisan effort, and it's kind of fun when you're in a political body of any sort to see all your hard work over several years from the state level of work you guys put into this, and now at the federal level actually come to fruition. So stay tuned. Hopefully in a couple, 2-3 years, even though the climate's in tough shape, we can maybe mitigate some of these worst outcomes.
So we talked a little bit about the resources to fight the fires, and then you touched on climate change as one of the potential causes. Could you tell us a little bit more of your thoughts on climate change as it relates to the fire environment?
Well, I'd have to be blind not to see that the climate has changed in the Pacific Northwest. And I'd argue that's probably true throughout the country. We can argue respectfully about what's caused it, that's fine. But as a little old farmer from Canby, Oregon, and I'd like to think a moderate steward of the land, you want to leave it a little better than when you came here. And if you do what you can, you do what you can. And I'd like to think that in Congress we're going to be willing to step up and do that. I think Oregon's going to have to lead the way a little more. We do have people that don't believe climate change is happening, and certainly don't believe, unfortunately, that people have anything to do with it, despite all the body of science that's out there. So it is difficult to get at that initiative in Congress. And so you have to work around the edges of that and do what mitigation you can. And hopefully the case will build for itself. I can't see how people don't realize the severe changes. How many 90-degree days have our friends to the north in Portland occurred? I mean, it's a record, right? I don't remember seeing much snow. I don't ever remember seeing this many days where it was so hot. You know, we used to never have 100-degree days in the state of Oregon, at least in the Willamette Valley, and it has changed dramatically. So it's our job, I think, our generation and the generation that's coming shortly after us, to step up and make some changes in how we view things, transition to cleaner renewable energies if possible. Frankly, get our colleagues and friends overseas to do that. I worry about not engaging them. There's a certain push by this administration to not engage people, kind of be more confrontative, and I respect that in some areas. That's probably appropriate, but you pick your battles. You don't fight everybody once. And I think, frankly, the goal here would be to get some of these other countries engaged in fighting. I've been to India and been to China, and it looks like this outside all the time. And frankly, until we get these people engaged, and you lead a little bit by example, it's going to be tough to change the future of this great state, this country, and frankly, our world.
Well, the conference this year is zeroed in on two big topics that our Oregon legislature will be dealing with in January. One of them has been the issue of carbon and climate, and the other one that we've been talking about today has been education. So I wanted to turn to that for a minute. I think Congress just passed an update to the Perkins CTE laws, and it was the first time that it had been updated, I think, in more than a decade. You were a co-sponsor of the legislation. What's this update mean for students and employers here in Oregon?
Well, the previous panel alluded to this a little bit. Education is not just a 4-year university degree. That's a wonderful thing, and the data will show you got a much better chance to get a good job, a family wage job, if you do that. But there's other avenues to family wage jobs and other ways to capture young people's imagination before they get bored with school. I personally went to school to play football and swim. That was my goal in high school. I could have cared less about the academic stuff. But it was a good way to keep you in school. And frankly, it's been proven in these career and technical education programs, if they're offered, that these students graduate with a 98% graduation rate. Wouldn't that be wonderful if every single high school in the state of Oregon had a 98% graduation rate? I mean, we would look for that. So the goal of the rewrite of the Perkins program was to make sure that it reached kids earlier. Now you can dip down into middle schools. You don't wait, as was talked about, you don't wait for them to be in post-secondary education. It's not just high school. Even dip down into middle school when kids are perhaps the most confused, trying to figure out, do they want to stay the course. Put that math into a great perspective where it means a job to them and they get a chance to work on things. The bill also puts I wouldn't say the onus, but puts the opportunity back into parents, teachers, school districts, and states to develop and businesses, to develop the most robust programs that are most meaningful to them at the time. Keep it nimble. If different businesses need workers, the different community colleges, high school, CTE programs can kind of tailor some of their opportunities in education to those. And they change over time, as was brought up by the previous panel. We don't know the jobs of the future, what businesses are going to want in terms of a workforce. But if you have a very nimble career and technical education program, you can actually make it so these kids don't think I'm a math genius or I don't spell or write so well. You know, they can still get a great family wage job. My hat's off to you, David, and the rest of the Oregon legislature. You've led the way with some of the career technical education opportunities you've pushed to the state legislatures and the grant programs that Foley has done. It's been very, very exciting. And the Congress is paying attention, and now we're trying to catch up to you guys, maybe leverage some of the money at the state and make that actually happen in greater degrees for more and more young people.
Well, and I appreciate that, but we at the Oregon Legislature still have our work cut out for us. Our host here this week, Arnie Roblin, is one of the leaders, along with Barbara Smith-Warner, of the Student Success Committee that's traveling the state looking for information. And you know, one of the aspects of that work that I don't know has been touched on in today's conversations, here in Oregon, we're lagging 3 weeks behind the national average in teaching days. And if you think about that, 3 weeks per year, after 12 years, we're graduating kids with a year less time in the classroom than neighboring states, than in average states. And you have to ask yourself, how does that have an effect on graduation rates and test scores and absenteeism? But more importantly, how does it affect their ability to go out into the world and thrive and succeed? And how does it affect their future employers, the businesses they will work for, help them thrive and succeed as well? So we indeed do have our work cut out for us, and I'm glad that the Coastal Caucus is focusing on that big topic today, and we'll continue to discuss it during the course of the day. I'm a small business owner. You know that. You were as well. Now you work for a bigger business. And here at the Coast, finding qualified, motivated, job-ready employees continues to be a challenge. And you see help wanted signs everywhere you look. But one of the other aspects of that is that people who want to work here at the Coast can't find a place to live here at the Coast. We've got a dire housing challenge, a vacancy rate in Lincoln County of less than 5%, 0.5%. And a quarter of the workforce in Newport commutes into work every day from as far away as Corvallis. We've got some work to do on housing issues here in Oregon as well as education. Can Congress help us?
A good question, and I hear that everywhere I go, on the coast, in the valley, the homeless situation, the lack of affordable housing for people starting out, or even people that have been, frankly, in the workforce, but at perhaps a lower paying job. It's become very, very difficult for people. I think it's getting better. Frankly, at the beginning of this Congress, there wasn't much going on at all, David. I was pretty concerned because I'm hearing about all this, up and down my district. And frankly, I talked to other legislators who have the same problem across the country. This is not, unfortunately, or fortunately, a unique problem for the state of Oregon. But there are those that are not big on, Congress investing in anything except the national defense, frankly. However, having said that, this most recent budget bill that we passed earlier this year for 2018, we're half a year behind the budget, but we actually passed the bill, had grants in there for homeless assistance. First time since I've been in Congress that we put that out. There's renter assistance relief out there, more focus like we've seen in the state of Oregon on veterans homelessness. We should be able to cure veterans homelessness, pick a piece of the puzzle that we really could devote on. I see in different counties they're doing some very innovative work along those lines. There's actually, and we actually put money behind it. You just didn't call out new programs, we actually put some money behind it. And frankly, just as an aside, in that very same budget, the federal government, to your point, finally started to step up in the education arena. Despite the orientation of the current Secretary of Education, Congress remains in a very bipartisan mode on support of public education. Pell Grants were increased in this most recent budget. Early childhood education got a big budget increase. We actually increased government support for special education, so it wouldn't ravage the state coffers, so the feds would pay a little bit more of their own fair share. So stay tuned. Again, to my earlier comment, I think the rank and file want to see our country move forward and are ready to take care and help out on this housing issue.
And I'm glad you touched on the veterans issue, and I'm looking across the room to my co-chair of the Transportation Economic Development Subcommittee, Senator Johnson, because last election cycle, Oregonians decided that they wanted us to substantially increase our investment in men and women that had served our country. And when that budget first came to our committee, there was a $10 million gap in it. She's nodding her head over there, a $10 million gap. And so we spent 6 months going through old handbags, looking under the cushions, and more seriously, negotiating and wrangling and building that budget back up to where it needed to be. And at the end of that process, I've never seen anything like this, because you're an old Ways and Means guy from Oregon, and we had a room full of men and women who stood up and applauded when we passed a budget. I've never seen people applaud when we passed a budget here in Oregon. And the other thing that I've never seen before is Senator Johnson tear up at that moment. But the result of that is that we've got more veteran service officers on the ground, we've got more housing programs and job programs and mental health programs, and we are in a position to better serve the people who have served us. An important and significant change here in Oregon that I think is going to make a difference to our Oregon veterans.
Well, I was pleased to see that. You know, the ballot measure, I think, spoke loud and clear about Oregonians' interest in supporting the men and women that have supported this country, and see the legislature step up and do the hard work. And having served on Ways and Means, I know how difficult it is to find money with all the competing interests. And my hat's off to you guys for doing that. It is one of the most bipartisan things we do in the United States Congress. We argue about all sorts of things. The one thing we don't argue about is our veterans. And we just passed actually the so-called VA Mission Act that reinvigorates the home caregiver program that we put a lot of effort into, made sure that GI benefits don't have a time limit on them anymore, because everyone comes to a different point in their life when they think they want to go back to school or get a career or technical education opportunity. We actually put some legislation in to try and make sure people got their retirement pay and home foreclosures wouldn't occur. This is on the top of the radar screen for folks in the United States Congress. And we may have all sorts of issues. Even if we have a budget shortfall or a budget shutdown, government shutdown, veterans will still get their benefits because we advance pay that part of the budget every year to make sure that they do not suffer because we're doing something foolish in Washington, D.C.
Well, I wanted to turn to one of the other big challenges that Oregon faces, but it's particularly and uniquely acute here on the coast, and it has to do with healthcare. And here in Lincoln County, I'm very pleased to say we are building not one but two brand new hospitals. And that's going to put us in a position where we're better prepared to deal with healthcare for the next 25 years rather than dealing with what healthcare has looked like for the last 25 years. But the fact remains that too often when you have anything of healthcare related need, you've got to go somewhere else for treatment. You've got to drive to the valley, whether you need to see an ophthalmologist specialist or to get a root canal or anything else. And one of the impacts that has on us here is that more people are moving to the coast, retiring to the coast in their active years, but then as they age, they move away. Remember I talked about our retirement industry and the transfer payments that are coming here? But people then are moving away to be closer to family, but also to be closer to a broader healthcare spectrum. And that's having an impact on our economies out here, as well as on our quality of life. So what can you say to us about healthcare that may have a unique and significant impact out here in this unique environment?
Well, we're not repealing it anymore. I mean, that's a positive step, right? tongue-in-cheek. Frankly, one of the most unique things, and I think one of the most extraordinary things in my brief congressional tenure was the passage of the Affordable Care Act. For the first time, millions of Americans had access to health care that they never had access to before. Oregon, we were already leading in that way. We had expanded our Medicaid population. This expanded it more and brought it on a national level. It was interesting to me to see, I'm on the healthcare subcommittee, as you alluded to, and we had those huge debates last year about repealing Obamacare. They didn't like Obamacare, they liked the ACA, but they didn't like Obamacare very much. And big controversy. And I kept listening, what the heck's really going on here? They're all complaining about these huge premium increases, deductible increases, and they're pretty passionate, pretty serious about it. And I'm trying to figure out, well, it can't be my leadership, Kurt, don't do that. Don't fix it. I'm thinking, what do you mean? And they say, well, this is a great campaign issue. We'll just campaign on this because the Republicans are going to look bad. And I'm a God-fearing Democrat, to be honest with you, but I thought, well, that's kind of foolish. It's not, number one, it's the wrong thing to do. And number two, I got to go back to my district. They're going to say, Kurt, you're just going to campaign against the Republicans? There's a problem here. Everyone knows it. Aren't you going to try and fix it? What's your plan? So after listening to the debate and listening to the lack of leadership on my side, I put together a bunch of folks, good Democrats across the spectrum in my party, in D.C., and asked them, please step up and let's see if we come up with a fix to this marketplace. And it came out similar to what Oregon did. Oregon did. They set up a reinsurance program. We also talked about cost-sharing subsidies for the really low-income folks. We talked about giving states more flexibility, not worrying so much, trying to make sure people signed up. Instead of discouraging people from signing up, we actually talked about ways to encourage people to sign up. Maybe you could buy into Medicare even if you weren't 65. And got a lot of push on that. I had a whole bunch. I had over half the caucus signed up for this thing. Then my caucus leader saw it was a great idea, but we had a really big push. Then I thought, well, that's fascinating, Kurt, but Democrats aren't in control here. Can actually get Republicans to play into fixing our healthcare system, lending some stability to our states' amazing efforts. And through this Problem Solvers Caucus I started a few years ago, I actually got bipartisan support from Republicans and Democrats, 48 of us, to sign up and to do a fix of that marketplace, much like I talked about. It's pretty amazing. So there's a way to stabilize this program, and I guess my message to everyone here is stay tuned. We actually have the Senate engaged. There's a number of senators. There were 12 very active in working with us on both sides of the aisle in the United States Senate on this individual marketplace fix, and so that we can stabilize the healthcare system in our country and then move on to fixing or expanding various pieces so that there's universal affordable access. And it's been fun and kind of exciting, despite the partisan nature of Congress these days, to actually work on something like this where, again, rank and file members see a way to get to yes and actually fix something so that we can bring that broad-based health care back to Lincoln County where you don't have to go in the valley to get the care you need.
Appreciate that, and I hope one of the issues that we continue to also talk about is the fact that we don't have large industries here. We don't have a lot of them. We've got a lot of very small businesses that are challenged to find health care for their owners and for their employees, and paying thousands of dollars a month for deductibles that nobody can afford to use. And at the end of the day, people aren't healthier, and they're certainly not more economically well off either. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left, less than that. I'm going to touch on one last question that's been intriguing me, and it has to do with our salmon. It has to do with our salmon and the threats to our salmon runs and what's going on with sea lions, and you've been right at the forefront of that. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Well, huge issue. Again, talk about going to the United States Congress and hopefully being slightly relevant to your folks back home. The sea lion predation on our salmon on the Columbia River and its tributaries, and you guys see if you're on the coast all the time too. You can't haul in a salmon without having a sea lion trailing right behind it at the end of the day. This is a huge issue, and you are probably preaching to the choir out here. Actually, the issue is brought to myself and Jamie Herrera Butler, who are Republican rep from Washington State, by our respective Fish and Wildlife departments. While climate change is undoubtedly responsible for a lot of what's going on in our rivers and oceans, the acidification, the lack of nutrients in the system, maybe some of the migration of these California sea lions upriver. And as you guys know, California sea lions do not habituate, or historically have not habituated, in the river. There's no historical evidence they've been in the Columbia River or its tributaries. But now they're quite abundant. It's a great success story. We have restored their population from decimated populations, decades ago. But as a biologist, veterinarian, you got to manage that population now. And that population has found its way up the Willamette River to Willamette Falls. The sea lions camp out at the 3 fish ladders there and have a field day. All the money, all the effort that every taxpayer, every God-fearing Oregonian, Washingtonian too, Idahoan, puts into their fish and wildlife restoration programs goes for naught when there's a salmon buffet by these 1.5 ton cuddly little animals that are decimating the salmon population. And so frankly, it seemed like the certified smart people brought this to our attention, very worried about the winter steelhead population actually going extinct in the next few years if we didn't do something right now to control this rampant sea lion issue. The good news is there's only a few bad actors out there. I went up to the falls, Willamette Falls. I see them up at Bonneville too. And the goal here with our legislation is to humanely euthanize some of these sea lions that unfortunately have learned that they can just come way out of their territory and decimate the salmon population.
I was going to jump in. So humanely euthanize. So we're not. Our friends from Fish and Wildlife are not going to be issuing sea lion tags.
No, I'm sorry, guys. No open hunting season.
We're not going to have shooting platforms that will
No, sir.
bowl.
No. This is done by men and women that have been trapping sea lions, quite frankly, for a long time. We've tried other methods, scaring them. We've tried transplanting them to different areas. You can transplant a sea lion from the Willamette Falls to Newport, Oregon.
And it'll beat you home.
It'll beat you home nearly. 5 days later, they'll be at home. They'll be back at the falls. Back at the falls, folks. These are unfortunately smart creatures and instinctively learn things. So the goal here is to trap them in the cages instead of just returning them to some other place where they come right back. We humanely euthanize them, dispose of them. And the goal here is if you get the ringleaders out of the way that have learned this trail to the falls, then you don't have to do it anymore. The others will stay in the mouth of the Columbia River or stay out in the ocean where they belong and hopefully continue to be a great success story. But we got that bill out of the House. We've worked closely with Senator Cantwell and Senator Rich over on the Senate side, and our senators are very vested in getting a solution to this problem too. We're this close. They came out of the Senate committee also. We're this close to getting it over the floor of the Senate and then hopefully be law. It's really important. If we don't do this, I am dreadfully worried that our iconic salmon and steelhead populations will not be repatriated no matter how much work we do upstream.
I could do this for another 45 minutes with you, Kurt, and I really appreciate your accessibility and your availability here today. I just wanted to point out, I know you're easy to get a hold of. Anybody who wants to can email you or call your office. Where is John from your staff? He's sitting over here. John shows up with annoying regularity in our local communities. We appreciate it.
He better.
So we have your office here all the time. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to give a big round of applause to our Congressman Kurt Schrader for the time he spent with us here today. And I'm going to turn things back over to our host, Arnie Rowland.
So just a few housekeeping things to say. We have 3 breakout sessions that follow here. In the Shasta room right next door, we have business leaders, practitioners, and policymakers working together to drive student success and build leaders of tomorrow.